Okay, welcome to graphing quadratics. So today I've got a couple of examples that I'm going to talk to you about quadratics. Some important features on quadratics about graphing are understanding the terminology of vertex, y-intercept, x-intercepts, and then tabling graphing them. Well, first, a quadratic is an ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 format. Now, we've heard of parabolas, and that's what these two shapes are, these two curves. Now, the vertex on both of them are right in the middle. That's important with us for word graphing. Now, the vertex on the left, this is if you think about a roller coaster ride, this is the minimum value. The vertex on the right is a maximum value. Now, these are determined by this right here, the A in our quadratic. If A is greater than 0, it's called an upward parabola. It's meaning concave up. Some of us may have heard that term before. Now, if A is less than 0, then it concaves downward, where it's a maximum. Now, one other thing I'm going to make note of, if we found out A is 0, this is not a quadratic. It would probably be linear. Now, if I give you this quadratic x squared plus 6x plus 5 equals 0 and ask you to graph it, there are several points that are very important to this graph. One is vertex, x-intercepts, y-intercepts, and then finally to graph it. The vertex is always negative b over 2a. Now, before we begin, we also need to define what our A, B, and C are. Well, look at our A right here. A is there's nothing in front of the x squared, so that is an understood 1. Our B is in front of the x, which is a 6. And finally, our C is right here. It is 5. So now we can use this information to help us find the vertex. So to find the vertex, what I want to do is I want to go ahead, I'm going to put minus, then in parentheses, over 2 in parentheses, and I'm going to substitute for B my 6, my A my 1, and then when I say minus 6 over 2, you should get a minus 3. Now this is the x coordinate of our vertex. So how do I put this, or if I'm trying to determine what our y value is, this is where you put the negative 3 in our original equation, x squared plus 6x plus 5, to get our y value. So all I'm doing now is I'm putting in parentheses where the x's are. And then I'm substituting the negative 3 because that's what we found x to be. So negative 3 squared, or negative 3 squared is 9. 6 times negative 3 is negative 18, plus a positive 5. This gives us a grand total of a negative 4. So I know my vertex is negative 3, negative 4. Now also too, since my A is positive, or it's a 1, I know when I graph it, it's going to look like an upward U shape, a parabola that's going upward. So now to find the x-intercepts, I'm going to show us the way that always works, and then here in a minute I'm going to show you another way as well. Okay, so here's our quadratic formula. It's minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So now what I need to do is I need to plug in the values of a, b, and c in this quadratic formula. So my a is 1, b is 6. So my a was 1, my b was 6, and my c was 5. So all I'm going to do is for my b, plug in my 6, for my b squared, my 6, my parentheses. The only thing I'm doing is substituting my numbers for my letters. So my a was 1, my c was 5, and then right here my a is 1. So all I'm doing is I'm plugging in the values in for my letters or my variables. So then we're going to carry this out. A negative 6 plus or minus. I'm going to get the plus or minus here in a minute. Plus or minus the square root of 6 squared is 36. Minus 4 times 1 times 5 is minus 20 over 2. So then I can say negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 20 is 16 over 2. Which comes out to be negative 6 plus or minus, okay, the square root of 16 is 4. Now, this is where the plus or minus comes into play. You're going to have a plus 4 and a minus 4. So what I want to do is I'm going to separate these and say, okay, negative 6 plus 4 over 2, and then negative 6 minus 4 over 2, and I'm going to put those in parentheses. When I use my calculator, I'm going to make sure the calculator understands order of operations. So negative 6 plus 2 is a negative 2 divided by 2. You would get negative 1. Negative 6 minus 4, which is a negative 10, divided by 2 is a negative 5. So if I go all the way up here, it's not negative 1, negative 5 as my coordinate, negative 1, 0, negative 5, 0. Now my y-intercept is something that's I need to show you as well, is for my y-intercept, it will always be this c value right here. So this is my y-intercept. So my y-intercept will always start off with a 0, and then in this case, it's going to be 0, 5. Now I've got 4 points. Now I can put it on a table and start to graph it. We'll scroll all the way down here. So now it doesn't matter the order we put it in. I want to just put in my vertex first. Negative 3, negative 4. Then I'll put my y-intercept, 0, 5. Then my x-intercepts, which I found with the quadratic formula, negative 1, 0, negative 5, 0. And now all I'm going to do is plot the points. Now, this, remember, since a was greater than 0, it should look like the upward U. So negative 3, let's plot these. Negative 3, negative 4, so negative 3, negative 4 right here, that's my vertex. Then 0, up 5, negative 1, and negative 5. And notice it's the upward, and this right here, this -3, -4 is my vertex. So a couple key things, let me go back to here real quick, is if the A is positive or greater than 0, it's an upward and it's got a minimum value for the vertex. And if it is a negative or it's less than 0, it's going downward with a maximum vertex. Now, the vertex formula right here is x equals -b over 2a. And then whatever you find x to be, you plug it into our original equation to get our y value for our vertex. In our quadratic formula, which is this -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a, this is to find my x-intercepts. Now, I'm going to show you one other thing too. I'm going to come right back up here, if I can have room. Now, this x squared plus 6x plus 5, we could factor this out and say 1 times 5 is 5. And then since the 5 is positive and 6 is positive, I know that you can add them together to get that 6 in the middle right here. So x plus 1, x plus 5 equals 0. And then all you have to do is separate these. So what in my parentheses gives, makes this 0? Well, x has to be -1. Right here, x has to be -5. These are what I found in my quadratic formula. So if you can factor it, yes, you can use the factor, like just what I showed us right here, or the quadratic formula always works because in our next example right here, we use a decimal. Okay, now I know this lesson has been a long lesson because quadratic formula in the vertex, there's a lot of steps to this. So what I'm going to do is I want to kind of speed this next one up. And what I want you to do is copy this down. And then I want on your own to do the vertex, y-intercept, x-intercept, and graph it. You can pause it and then see what I have and then come back to it. And you can do both of these examples as many times as you want. I would just go back and look at both examples. Okay. So let's see this right here. Now, I've got x squared equals, x squared plus 2.4x minus 3. So right off the bat, what I want to do is I want to define what my a, b, and c are. Well, my a is 1 because it's an understood 1 in front of the x squared. My b is this 2.4. And my c is my -3. Now, as far as what I can go ahead and do right now, that -3 is my y-intercept, so I can go ahead and put this right here. Next, vertex. Vertex was -b over 2a. Here we go. All I'm doing is substituting my values in for b and my a, showing you how to do it. I got x equals -1.2. Then I put it in and square it, plus 2.4 times -1.2 minus 3, and I get -4.4. So my vertex will be -1.2, comma, -4.4. Now my x-intercepts is using my quadratic formula. The -b plus or minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. All I'm doing is I'm plugging in those values I did for my a and b. So then my next step, what I want to do is after I plug all these in, that's why I always do this with parentheses. I look at whatever variable, I put parentheses, and then I put in or substitute the value in what my A, B, and C are for my quadratic form or equation. Now, minus 2.4 plus or minus 2.4 squared is 5.76. And then minus 4 times 1 times negative 3 gives me a plus 12 right here, all over 2. Then I'm adding my 5.76 and my 12 together to get 17.76 under the square root. Then I'm taking the square root of this 17.76 to get 4.2. Now I've got a minus 2.4 plus or minus 4.2 over 2. Now this plus or minus right here, I'm going to split it up. I'm going to do the positive 4.2 and the minus 4.2. So it's going to be negative 2.4 plus 4.2 over 2 and negative 2.4 minus 4.2 over 2. Now notice I put parentheses around both, because if you don't do this and you put this in our calculator just like how you see it without the parentheses, it's going to give you the wrong answer. So I would advise us to either put in parentheses or hit enter, then divide by 2. These are my two X-intercepts. And I always like making these, even though you're not required to. Probably for most of us at least. This kind of gives me a good visual of my points. So at the end, when I can put these in my table, then I can graph them. So all these points, this right here is my vertex. This is my y-intercept. This is my x and my x. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to graph these, negative 1.2 and negative 4.4. So negative 1.2, probably right in here, go down to 4.4, somewhere right in there. 0, negative 3.9, that's close to my 1. And negative 3.3, somewhere right in here. Now, since my A was 1 and it's positive, I know my parabola should look like this. And there you go. So like I said before, look at these examples. Go back and do these over. And this gives you an idea about how to graph quadratics. Thank you for listening.